Plessy vs. Ferguson by me, Ivan Ngo. What was the Plessy v. Ferguson case? Plessy v. Ferguson was an incident organized by the Citizens Committee. The Citizens Committee was a civil rights group consisting of blacks, whites, and other races. Together, they had the central goal of protesting for the repeal of the Separate Car Act in Louisiana. What was the Separate Car Act, and why did the Citizens Committee despise it? Passed in 1890 by the Louisiana government, the law required African Americans to have separate railroad waiting rooms and ride separate train cars from whites. The East Louisiana Railroad Company also opposed the law since it was costly to include separate train cars. How did the Citizens Committee protest against the Separate Car Act? The Citizens Committee convinced Homer Adolph Plessy to partake in a test case against the Separate Car Act. The committee chose Plessy since he was 7/8 white and looked white, but was considered a black man under Louisiana law. What did Plessy do in the test case? On June 7, 1892, Plessy purchased a first-class ticket for the East Louisiana Railroad in New Orleans, Louisiana. Having the appearance of a white man, Plessy was able to board the whites-only car. As the train conductor went to collect Plessy's ticket, Plessy confessed he was 1/8 black. After hearing Plessy's confession, the train conductor directed Plessy to move to the colored-only train car. In a civil act of disobedience, Plessy refused to move, claiming that he had already purchased a first-class ticket on the whites-only train car. What was the result of Plessy's civil disobedience? After refusing to move train cars, Detective Chris C. Kane, who was hired by the Citizens Committee, boarded the train and, as planned, arrested Plessy. Plessy was then sentenced to the Orleans Parish Jail and was released with a $500 bond. The case may seem close, but it was in fact only the beginning. How did Plessy's trial turn out? A month after Plessy's arrest, his case was presented to Judge John Howard Ferguson. In the trial, Plessy's lawyer, Albion Torje, who was a member of the Citizens Committee, argued that Plessy's civil rights were being violated from the Separate Car Act. Judge Ferguson resolved that Louisiana has the right to control railroad companies that worked inside the state, and therefore, the Separate Car Act was perfectly legal. By this judgment, Plessy was found guilty of violating the Separate Car Act and was fined $25. What happened after Plessy's failed trial? After losing the court case to Judge Ferguson, the Citizens Committee appealed the case to the Supreme Court of Louisiana. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court only supported Ferguson's decision and refused a rehearing. What happened in the Supreme Court trial? After another third trial, the Citizens Committee appealed the case one last time to the U.S. Supreme Court. Finally, 4 years later, in 1896, the case was heard before the United States Supreme Court. In the trial, Albion Torje and Plessy's other lawyers argued that the Separate Car Act violated Plessy's rights for the 13th and 14th Amendments. The 13th Amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Since the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, Plessy's lawyers argued that his rights were being violated. Requiring blacks to ride separate train cars from whites suggested that blacks were inferior, which was a common idea during the era of slavery. The 14th Amendment states that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Plessy's second argument was that blacks were not being treated equally with whites, since they rode different train cars. As a result, Plessy's right to be equal under the law from the 14th Amendment was being ignored. The United States Supreme Court responded to the first argument by stating how separating citizens of different races did not convey inequality or establish slavery. In response to the second argument, the Supreme Court explained that the 14th Amendment ensured absolute equality, but not social equality for the citizens. What was the end result of the trial? On the date of May 18, 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Separate Car Act in Louisiana was legal and constitutional. The decision was 7 judges against 1, a majority rule. One judge was absent to attend his daughter's funeral. Justice John Marshall Holland was the only judge who did not support the Supreme Court's ruling for the case. He is known as the lone dissenter, who criticized the other judges' decisions and predicted the consequences of their ruling. What is the significance of the Plessy v. Ferguson case? The Plessy v. Ferguson case established a separate but equal doctrine throughout the United States. The doctrine legalized segregation as long as the separate facilities, such as schools, waiting rooms, etc., were equal for blacks and whites. Throughout the country, Jim Crow laws designed to segregate blacks from whites, spread into every state. Despite the separate but equal idea, most of the schools, restaurants, and other places for blacks were inferior than the same places for whites. How does the Plessy v. Ferguson case relate to American history? Plessy v. Ferguson is the cause of the Civil Rights Movement. Segregation and Jim Crow laws spread through America as a result from the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to establish the separate but equal doctrine and rule that segregation was legal. In response to the Jim Crow laws and legal segregation that were established, the Civil Rights Movement formed to end racial discrimination and segregation. If the Plessy v. Ferguson case never occurred, the segregation for blacks would be less discriminatory and the Civil Rights Movement possibly wouldn't have happened at all. Plessy v. Ferguson also connects to the Brown v. Board of Education. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the separate but equal doctrine in the Brown v. Board of Education case. The court ruled that the doctrine in segregated schools were unconstitutional. How does Plessy v. Ferguson relate to America today? Plessy v. Ferguson revolved around the rights guaranteed by the 13th and 14th Amendments. Today, those rights that abolish slavery and allow everyone to be equal under the law allow citizens of every race in America to be protected from segregation, preventing the Plessy v. Ferguson case from ever occurring today. To this day, the Plessy V Ferguson case remains one of the worst decisions made by the US Supreme Court throughout American history. However, people today can look back on this case and be grateful of how far America has grown to know that segregation should never be constitutional in any form.